Good evening. My name is John Page from Dymocks. Welcome to tonight's Chapter 1 event. Our very special guest tonight is Ann Cleeves. Ann is the author behind television series Vera and Shetland, but she's written over 25 novels and has sold over 1 million copies worldwide. In 2012, she was inducted into the Crime Writers Association Crime Thriller Awards Hall of Fame, and she is talking to us tonight about her latest book, The Darkest Evening, starring DCI Vera Stanhope. Welcome, Ann, to Dymocks Chapter 1.
It's lovely to be here.
Where are you talking to us from tonight?
I'm talking to you from Whitley Bay, and it's morning here. And Whitley Bay is a faded seaside town, and it's appeared lots and lots of times in episodes of Vera, so people might recognise it if they saw it. There's one particular ice cream parlour on the seafront, which is very retro, very 1930s, and I think it's been in 4 or 5 episodes so far, but that's where I live.
Fantastic. Tell us a little bit about The Darkest Evening, the 9th book in the Vera Stanhope series.
Yeah, it's a midwinter book, so a kind of country house Christmas with almost a golden age flavour, but I hope it has a contemporary twist. It starts with a blizzard just before Christmas, and Vera's driving home, gets lost in the snow, just loses her concentration and takes a wrong turn, driving down a narrow little road with a forest on one side, and comes across a car that's slewed off the track. The driver's door is open, there's no sign of anybody, and she's just about to drive on when she hears a cry and finds a toddler in the back seat. And she finds the nearest house, and it turns out to have been the house where her father Hector grew up. So we find out a lot more about her background and her backstory too.
Excellent. So most crime authors are known for one series, but you've written 2 series starring characters that are beloved on the page as well as on the screen. How do you balance writing both series?
Well, I've got another series now because I've stopped writing about Shetland. I'm not writing about Shetland anymore. 8 books set in a tiny community of just 23,000 people seemed to be enough. You know, I'd killed off quite a lot of them, and the drama series had killed off even more. So yeah, I decided I'd stop writing that before I got bored, really. I love the islands and I love going back, but I didn't want readers to get bored either. My interest, I suppose, I'd covered everything that I wanted to explore there. So now I've got this series, the Vera Stanhope series, and a series that the first book came out last year set in North Devon, called the 2 Rivers series, and that features a different detective, Matthew Venn. But I love writing too. I think I would struggle to just stick with one. I love coming to the end of writing a book and thinking, oh great, I can go home and be with Vera for a bit now, or oh that's grand, I can go south and explore North Devon for a while. So
excellent. Yeah, so I was going to say, so you have launched a new series last year with The Long Call. So where does that series fit in your future writing plans? Are we going to see a lot more of that one, or is it something you're just going to revisit when you feel like it?
No, I think I'll alternate with the Vera books as I did with Shetland. So I've just finished the first draft of that. And of the new book, the second book, which will come out this time next year. And I've loved going back to Matthew Venn. I really liked writing about him. He grew up in a very tight, small evangelical religious community and lost his faith as a teenager. And it seemed to me that when I was writing it, that if that had happened to you, you might find in the police service that idea of duty and honour and community that he'd had as a child growing up. And he's kind of found that being a police officer. So that was fun to write. And he's gay. So it's actually the first happy marriage I've written about for years and years and years. And I loved writing that marriage. It was such fun.
What do you hope readers will discover in your books?
I don't know. I suppose partly I think that the story is enough, and to be hooked on a strong narrative line and to be carried along by that. But I think any fiction that you read helps you see the world through somebody else's eyes. So I think anything that gets you inside the skin of another person, and maybe a person that you might not like when you met them in real life, but if you can get inside and look out from their eyes, then you have a slightly different perspective. I think readers are more tolerant generally.
So with each series, how does each series then affect your writing? So do you have a favorite character that you write for? Does switching between series change how you approach the book, or do you still approach them all and you kind of fit into each character smoothly, or is it a process?
I think so. I think both the characters grow out of place. My daughter's an academic, she's a human geographer, and I think what I do is what she does. She researches the individual within their own setting, within the community, within the landscape. And I think that setting is more than just a pretty backdrop to the action. It actually informs the characters and the plot. So I start off with the place, and then what might happen here, or is there a bit of the place that I'm specifically interested in? So in The Darkest Evening, it's set in rural Northumberland, and that is still quite feudal here. We do have the big country houses and the tenant farmers and the people who live in tied cottages. So there is a very close relationship between the landowner and the people who work the land, and I was quite interested to look at that quite nuanced relationship. If you own the house and the land, you do have obligations and responsibilities, as well as that certain power over the people who work with you. So I suppose it always comes out of place. It always starts with place. And the Two Rivers books, again, North Devon is a very interesting place. It's famous for it. It's a seaside Devon. People go to Devon and Cornwall for their holidays and for the surfing, and it's not as good as Australia, but it's pretty good. But there's also, I don't know, again, there are these faded seaside towns which I love, that were really important in Victorian times, but then those big guest houses and villas have been taken over as maybe hostels for homeless people or for asylum seekers. So you get lots of different communities within the same town, and I do love to explore how those bump into each other and rub up against each other.
Excellent. So you've had 2 television series based on your books. What effect does the television series have on your writing? Because you continued to write the series while the TV series was going as well. You mentioned already that the Shetland series, they were killing off more people than you were. Does it have an effect on your writing, or do you need to kind of block what's happening in the TV world away from what's happening in the book world?
I don't think I block it, but I think they're just very different forms. And right from the beginning, I decided I didn't want to roll within the TV series. I didn't want to attempt to write a script. I didn't want to be, a named executive producer or anything like that. It seemed to me that I'm good at what I'm good at, and I wouldn't be good at writing for television. And these people who are creatives in their own right should be allowed their own creative vision. They would have a very clear idea about how the show would work. And having me stick my nose in and say, oh, I don't like that, or no, you shouldn't change that, would just muddy that vision of theirs and would mean that it just wouldn't be such a good piece of television, I think.
And so the long call has now also been optioned. Does that add any extra pressure to deliver more in the series or stay ahead of the TV series? Or
no, I don't really feel any pressure. I think because for 20 years of writing, my first 20 years of being published, I didn't have any commercial success. So I've just got into this rhythm, this routine of writing a book a year, and I start in the new year and I usually get it finished about now, and I love it. That's what I love best, is just sitting at my kitchen table and making up stories. And I certainly, as you'll have gathered, I'm not very good at the technology, so it's just as well that there are other people who can do that for me. So I love just making up the stories and doing the writing.
And you mentioned before about how important location is to your stories and kind of inspiring you and going forward. What drew you to the Shetland Islands, and why did you decide to set a crime series there?
Oh, that's quite a nice story. I dropped out of university. I don't have any academic qualifications at all, which is, I think, is quite nice. But yeah, dropped out of university, needed to get work. Just by chance, in a pub in London, bumped into somebody who was about to go off and be assistant warden in the bird observatory of Fair Isle, which is one of the smallest inhabited islands in the UK. And I said something like, oh, that sounds fun. And he was moaning it would be cold and wet and miserable. And I said, well, I wouldn't mind spending a summer on Fair Isle. And he said, well, if you're serious, they're desperate for an assistant cook. So I went up, and I didn't know where it was. You know, I thought vaguely it was one of the Western Isles. I come from Devon, so I didn't know at all where Fair Isle was, but it is part of the Shetland group. It's a long way north. It's 13 hours by boat from Aberdeen up to Shetland mainland. And then it's on the same line of latitude as bits of Greenland and Alaska. People don't realise it's a long way north.
Yeah.
And very bleak and very beautiful. And then 3 hours on this tiny mail boat, which is called the Good Shepherd. And it's a horrible boat trip. So I arrived into Fair Isle so seasick, but fell in love with it, fell in love with the island and the people who lived there. And that started a love affair with Shetland, really. And so, yeah, a long time later, I wrote Raven Black, which is the first of the Shetland books and a bit of a game changer in my career.
Fantastic. That's a great story. Do you plot your stories in advance, or do you always know who done it, or do you see where the characters take you? Like, so how much of the mystery do you plan ahead, or do you kind of let the story kind of flow sometimes?
Yeah, I don't plan anything ahead really, except I have a sort of vague idea of the voice and the tone and the world, I suppose, a sense of the world without any specifics in it. And again, it's because I took such a long time having any commercial success, you know, that it's got to be fun. And if I knew how it ended, somehow there'd be no point writing it. It's the journey that's important. It's a bit like reading the end of a book before you start the book itself. So I do write very like a reader. I'll write the first scene. So the scene that I described in The Darkest Evening, at that point, I don't know who the child is, who it belongs to, who its mother is. So I have to write the next scene to find out. And that's how I carry on. And as with a reader, I start to get some idea about where it might be leading. But I don't really know until I get to the end.
Have you ever surprised yourself with where the story's gone?
Yeah, I do sometimes, but I don't try and force it, because it doesn't work that way for me. I need to let it grow, as you say, quite organically, let the story grow. And that does mean quite a lot of rewrites, because obviously you have to go back, because I do write very traditional crime fiction and I like to play fair with the readers. So I love that idea of that cheap thrill of the surprise ending. You know, oh yeah, I should have known that all the way through.
It's really a surprise ending if the writer doesn't know where it's going while they're writing it too.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It works both ways. But I do love that, and it's a bit scary. So there's good with that too. You know, that you do need to be a little bit scared to work out how it's going to go. Someone once said that writing was like riding the wall of death on a motorbike. It was fine until you started thinking about what you were doing. So I don't think you can question yourself too much.
So your books have been described as village noir. Do you think crime writing is pigeonholed?
Yeah, I guess so, but a lot less than it was, I think. And I think people are though it's always been tricky, hasn't it? Because in the between the wars, the real golden age, our poet laureate wrote crime fiction under the name Nicholas Blake. So it's never. I think T.S. Eliot loved reading crime fiction, so it's always been something that writers and readers have enjoyed, maybe as sort of comfort reading, escape reading. And I don't mind that really. I think I read very widely. But now I think, certainly in the UK, since we had more books in translation, then the genre is much wider than it used to be. So you can have somebody like, I don't know, Fred Vargas, who writes in French originally, and that's almost has traces of magic realism in it. And some of the Scandis are really quite dramatic and quite violent. And then you might have someone like Ragnar Jonsson from Iceland, who writes very traditional murder mysteries, but really brings them up to life and gives them quite a Nordic noir flavour. So I think we're much more open to different ways of working now. And if you think about it, crime fiction does tackle big issues of criminal justice, of social justice, of equality and poverty. And certainly in the UK, a lot of police time is spent working with people who are mentally ill, who've been discharged from psychiatric units, who the community care is stretched. So in a way, our police officers have become much more like social workers than they were. So we can cover topics and issues that are important to us, as well as it's no longer just a puzzle to be solved.
So you mentioned a couple of crime writers. What are some of your favourite crime writers, and who has had the biggest influence on you as a writer?
I don't know. You see, I've always loved crime. And I guess if I were to pick the one that I think has been most influential, it's probably Simenon, who wrote the Maigret books.
Yeah. So
going all the way back to my first crime and translation that I ever read, I suppose, because that is my passion. I love reading that. Because he is such a clear writer, and in one sentence he can describe a character, put them in context, in place, move the plot on. His books are tiny, they're slender. But and I love that he says of his Inspector Maigret that Maigret's role is to understand, not to judge. And I think that a lot of contemporary heroes of crime fiction that's what they do.
Are you a fan of any Australian crime writers?
I am, yeah. Again, it's the sense of place that is really important for me. So Jane Harper, I guess, The Dry was one of my favourite crime novels of all time. And more recently, I loved Chris Harmer's books too. I've read the first two in that series. And again, he's so strong on place, isn't he? That the first one with the again, quite like Jane's The Dry, that drought, that heat, that sense of a small community where there are secrets, but actually they're not secrets. They're known as well. And so, I do love that. And there's a second book called Silver, I think.
Yes.
That's a very interesting community on the coast that could be West Coast America almost. I did enjoy that one too.
Yeah, they're both favourites, and they both have new books coming out at the end of this year. I think Jane Harper has a new book out next week as well, in fact.
Brilliant. No, I didn't enjoy the second one so much, but people told me that the third was terrific, so I need to look at it.
Yes, yeah, no, The Lost Man is very good too. The process of reading and writing can be therapeutic. During the past 6 months, Australians have actually been reading 30% more than they were pre-COVID. How has the act of reading and writing fiction helped you?
I think it has a lot, and I was thinking about it quite recently. Vera is 21 this year. The first book was published in 1999, the first Vera book, which is fairly astounding. There have been gaps in my writing about her ever since then. And really, she arrived fully formed on the page. I was writing a funeral scene and I'd got really stuck. And was it Raymond Chandler who said, if you're stuck with a plot, have a door burst open and a guy come through with a gun. But I don't do guns, being British. But I thought I would just have a door burst open and there would be, I'll see who came through. And who came through was Vera. And I had her name and describe her as looking more like a bag lady than a detective. And she was carrying all her notes in a supermarket plastic bag instead of a briefcase. So she came actually quite easily, but then I needed to explore her. And that happened. My husband was later diagnosed as having bipolar disorder, but at the time we thought he'd had this huge nervous breakdown, and he was recovering, but how he recovered was by walking. So we were walking throughout Northumberland doing these long walks, and all the time Vera was coming back to me. And then just before formal lockdown, I got asked to give a speech at a conference on health inequality, looking at how poverty, really, how poor people get more sick. And we've seen that with COVID as well. And I think they just wanted me to tell a story. So I told this story about Tim and the walking, and how reading and writing had seen me through that dreadful time when it was almost as if my husband was a stranger. You know, I didn't know who he was, and he was so depressed and got so angry and so miserable. And it was reading and telling stories that got me through. And just at the end of this conference, I sort of threw out a challenge that I would sponsor 2 project workers to look at how reading might help people who are ill, either through mild depression or mild anxiety or chronic pain. You know, if you've got arthritis and the pain is always with you, it seemed to me that reading might be a slight escape. And especially for people who were new to reading for pleasure, because some people don't get that habit in childhood. They miss out because they don't have booky parents, or they less and less now we have access to libraries. So the idea is that the GPs and doctors will do social prescribing and will refer people to our project workers, who will talk books with them, help them find a book that they might lose themselves in. Later, when we're allowed to become a member of a reading group, perhaps a library, and working very closely with libraries. And I was just delighted because we now have 5 local authorities. So we've got three authorities that are funding themselves besides the 2 that I'm funding. And we're all set up to go, working with medics and with libraries and with the voluntary sector. And we've got a team who are going to do a proper peer-reviewed evaluation research, and let's see what works and what doesn't, and we can maybe roll it out more widely if it does.
That's fantastic. That sounds so wonderful. Books kind of almost saving lives. It's, you know,
I don't see why not.
Yeah,
I've done quite a lot of work in prisons, and it was quite interesting talking to a young woman who'd been homeless and had been living rough. And she used to knit books at bookshops, but she did say that it was reading, you know, camped out underneath an arch by the river. It was that reading that kept her going and stopped her throwing herself in. So
it shows you how important a book can be.
Yeah, I think so.
So I've got one more question, and then we're going to throw over to the audience. But what was the last book that you read and loved?
I am reading at the moment because we've got it seems as if we've got another lockdown coming here in the northeast. So it's all a bit dour and miserable. And what cheers me up is Andrea Camilleri's Montalbano books set in Sicily. So I found one of those, and that's what I'm reading at the minute. Before that, the book that I read and loved was Summer Water by Sarah Moss, which isn't really a crime, but it's a beautifully written book if you get a chance to read it.
Fabulous. Okay, so now we'll see what lovely audience have got to ask you. So got any questions, please post them below the video, and we'll pop them up on the screen. So a question from Mary. We've got a comment. Reading is therapy. That's really great.
Yeah, I can see lots of comments in the chat where people saying absolutely silly. I can tell you that I came to do the Bendigo Book Festival a couple of years ago, I think now, and my favourite event was going further into the countryside. I think a place called Burt. Does that sound right? And it had and I was there to open. They'd had a refurbed library, and I was there to help them open their library. And it was the best afternoon of the whole of my trip to Australia. So I had such a good time there. So have me back, please.
Yes, more just to come back once everything's back open again. Okay, so we've got a question from Sarah. Do you research police procedures, or do you know someone who helps?
I don't research. That's too much like hard work. But I do have people who help. and I did work as a probation officer, so I do have a little bit of an understanding about the criminal justice system. It's a bit out of date now, but yeah, I was trained as a social worker, so did that. So I have worked with murderers and people and with other offenders. But no, I have 3 sources of information. The first is a good friend called Helen Pepper, who was crime scene manager in County Durham for most of her career and now teaches on the policing course at a university in the northeast. So she's brilliant. Because she's working with police officers who are also lecturers now. And so anything that she doesn't know, she can put me in touch with somebody who does. So they're terrific on police procedure and training, and I can phone Helen up and say, what would a body look like if it's been in a reservoir for 20 years, or what would you do if you were called to this crime scene? And I did phone her about the snow scene. You know, what would you do if you were a crime scene manager and it was snow? And apparently it's almost impossible to take footwear print casts in snow. And so they hate it. They really hate footprints in snow. And then I have another, they're all great friends, but this is Professor James Grieve, who is a forensic pathologist based in Aberdeen. So if there were a murder in Shetland, he would be the person to do the post-mortem. And he's just brilliant on bones and what you can tell from a skeleton and stuff like that. He was a great help in a book called The Seagull, a Vera book, which ends up with 2 skeletons being found in a single grave. And then my last advisor is another professor, and she's called Lorna Dawson, and she's a forensic soil scientist. So she's good on, you know, if you get a bit of soil on a boot, she can actually tell within a square kilometre whereabouts in Scotland that boot has been walking.
Wow.
So that's pretty impressive.
Very impressive. Okay, so I've got a question now from Danielle. Hello, Anne. I love your strong female characters throughout the different series, like Willow Reeves, Vera, and Jen from Long Call. Do you enjoy writing these characters?
Yeah, I love writing strong women, and I suppose that's why I've stuck with Vera over the years, because she's a woman of a certain age, but she has that authority and that competence, and she doesn't care what she looks like. And yeah, and I'm very much enjoying writing Jen. So I've just finished the first draft of this new Matthew Venn book, and I'm exploring her a lot more, and we see a lot more of the action from her eyes in that. So yeah, I think I like writing. I like all my characters. I do not write monsters. I think even the people who are, I don't think I write about evil people. I think I write about people who do evil things, but I think we can understand, I hope we can understand why they do them.
I've got a question from Karen. How has the character of Vera evolved for you?
I think she's still the Vera that first walked in through that church door in the funeral. But I think she has mellowed over the years, and that's partly down to the portrayal by Brenda Blethyn, the fantastic actress who plays her. Sorry, excuse me. The actress that plays her in the television. And because Brenda can do that witty put down and the sarcasm very, very well, but there is a real compassion within her. And I think I've picked on that a bit. So my Vera is perhaps gentler than she was when we started out. I think what we know about Vera is that she hates to be patronised. She would really, and so she refuses to patronise her team. But I think she's starting to realise that throwing out a bit of praise every now and again will work wonders. So I think in that way she's getting a bit gentler and a bit kinder.
Some good management skills.
Yeah, I don't think she's a brilliant manager, but she's all right doing that.
So I've got a question from Monica now as well. So do you feel that Brenda Blethyn portrays Vera the way you imagined her?
Yes, very much. And I was so lucky to have Brenda agree to play the part. Partly, I think that we would never have got the show onto television if Brenda hadn't put a name to it. Because when we started, she was very, very famous for being, a double Oscar nominee for Secrets and Lies and for Little Voice. And her way of working, because she worked with Mike Leigh on those films, is to really understand the character. And she's not using her own experience, it's to create a character who's different from her. And her way of doing that, she says, is to go back to the source material, which is to go back to really go back to the books. So she reads all the books. And I don't know if everybody's seen it, but there's a great bit of video of her reading that scene of finding the child in the car. I think it's on YouTube, but if you can get it through the Pam Macmillan website. And that's a lovely, what a generous thing for her to do, to sit in her living room and read that in lockdown so that everybody could see her reading it. So yeah, we do talk about our Vera now.
So I've got a question from Rhonda. What actor will play Ven when they turn the long call into a TV series?
I don't have any idea, and it's only optioned at the minute. So lots of books get optioned for adaptation, but they don't always get commissioned or turn into real life. And as I said before, I'm really not precious about the books, and I don't want to be. I don't feel as if the books belong to me once they're in the hands of the reader, because every reader brings their own imagination and their own prejudice and their own history to a book. And so really giving it to a director is just another step from that to realizing that I'm not, that it's over to somebody else now. You're the people doing the creating once you're reading it. So I'm very happy to let them make decisions about casting. I don't even mind if they change the murderer.
So Terry's here. I watched Brenda Blethyn read Some of the Darkest Evening, and I found myself wishing she was the narrator in the audiobooks. Is there any chance of that ever happening? Hugh Fraser did that for the Poirot books.
No, the narrator for the audiobooks is called Janine Burkett, and I think she's fabulous because unlike Brenda, who doesn't come from the Northeast, Janine does. So she does have that authentic accent. I think Brenda would struggle to carry through a reading for a whole book. It would be a real strain, I think, even on a great actor like her. So Janine, if you haven't heard them, try Janine's reading because she's terrific. She's won all sorts of awards for doing them. So listen out for her.
Audios are fabulous, aren't they? Especially when they get the narrator spot on like that.
Yeah, I think so. And the guy that reads the Shetland books is called Kenny Blythe, and he's wonderful too. And although we've just got one of them, Matthew Venn, the person who reads that is Ben Aldridge, and people might know him. He was in Fleabag, and he's been in a number of different films and TV. But he comes from Devon, so again, apparently Jen, the police officer that you were talking about, is a Scouser. And apparently he doesn't do a good Scouse accent from Liverpool, but he does a very good Devon accent.
And from Bridget here, who came up with Vera's hat?
Oh, that would have been the design team at the TV, yes. I don't think she had it right at the beginning, but there it was. And now they sell those hats on the quayside in Newcastle. They call them Vera hats, and tourists go and buy them. So I'm doing my bit to support local business.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It's great that we are bringing people into the Northeast through the show. I think governments sometimes think of the creative industries as being a bit sort of woolly and not terribly important. But Vera, the show, has sold to 200 different territories throughout the world. So that's bringing income into the country, but also into the region, because we are pulling tourists in, that people come and do Vera location tours now. You could take a bus trip around where Vera's been shot. And certainly in Shetland, since the TV drama was broadcast in Shetland, tourism went up by 43%.
Wow.
And lots of people go and look at Jimmy Perez's house. And that was quite interesting because the guy that lived there, he loved the books and been a bit of a fan, and I would go up and always launched the books in Shetland, and he would come along, and he's called Eric, he'd be on the front row. And when it was in the Shetland Times that the BBC were going to turn it into a drama, I got a little email from him saying, yes, they may use my house, because he knew that the house that was Jamie Ferris's house was his. I think he might be regretting that a bit now, because coach trips come and park outside and people sit on his wall and take photos of selfies of themselves with his house in the background. So I think he might be regretting that very generous offer. I think he probably gets quite well paid for it now.
So I've got a question here from Kathy as well. Are you making an appearance at Bloody Scotland this year? And for those watching, can you please let us know what Bloody Scotland is?
Yeah, Bloody Scotland is a crime writers festival, crime readers festival. It's usually based in Stirling. It's great fun. If you happen to be in the UK in the autumn, it's usually happens at the end of September, and it's a very friendly crime writing festival. This year it's virtual, and yes, I will be there. I'll be on a panel with Peter May, who wrote the fabulous books set in the Hebrides, amongst other things. And will be chaired by Jenny Brown, who's a very famous literary agent. And I think that's Saturday at 1 o'clock our time. So it'd be quite late your time, would it? 10 o'clock your time. Yeah. But have a look on my website because it'll be there.
And Penelope asks, can you repeat the favourite 2 recent books?
Yes. Any book by Andrea Camilleri, who writes about a Sicilian detective called Montalbano. And if you're cold or miserable or just everything seems a bit grey and gloomy, he's funny, he's witty, he's political, he's always poking fun at politicians and their connections with the mafia. And you get the sense of heat. And he describes Italian food so that it makes you so hungry, and he drinks a lot of wine. And so that's the first one, Andrea Camilleri. And the second writer I talked about was Sarah Moss, and she wrote a book called Summer Water, which is all one word. And that's set in a kind of holiday complex by the side of a loch in Scotland, and it's raining. And there are these wooden lodges, which might have been quite smart at one time, but aren't anymore. And we see what's going on throughout one day from the perspective of some of the people who are staying in these lodges. And they're just beautifully written. And it has quite a disturbing climax, which is, I guess, almost crime fiction.
Excellent. All right, last question. Who's going to be the lucky last? From Tim. So what's next for you, Anne?
What next for me is that this book that I'm writing, this new Matthew Venn book, will go off to the publisher, and I should get the edits back reasonably quickly. And I shall work on that. Fingers crossed and touch wood, they should be filming a new series of Vera starting at the end of this month. Again, it's a bit troublesome because we've got a spike in cases here in the northeast, and they always film in Northumberland. They'll be starting to film a new series of Shetland in the new year, and I'm just starting to think about what Vera book I'm going to write next. Excellent.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for everyone out there who tuned in. Don't forget you can grab The Darkest Evening from Dymocks, or your local Dymocks store, or if you wanted to buy it online, there is a special discount code in the comments under the video. Thank you again for joining us, Anne, and please join us for the next Chapter 1 events coming up. We actually have Jane Harper speaking to us next week.
Tell how much I love the books, please.
Yes, so it's called Survivors is the new one. And we've also got Sarah Wilson next week as well. So please tune in for more Chapter 1s. But thank you again so much, Anne, for joining us tonight or this morning, your time. And thank you, everyone, for tuning into Chapter 1. And please support your local Dymocks stores. and grab more books. As we've heard, books that bring joy and can help save lives, and Ann's are great to read too. So go and grab a book from your local Dymocks store. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, and apologies for the technical mess up at the beginning, which was entirely at my end.
Thank you, everybody. Good night, everyone.